Okay, folks, this is the Impunity Observer podcast. Fergus Hodgson with you. Thanks for tuning in. ImpunityObserver.com is our website. I'm a managing editor. So pleased to be with our editor-at-large, Steve Hecht. And later in the show, we'll have Mauro Echeverria, our deputy editor based in Ecuador, on to chat with you. So this is a lovely occasion to catch up on the content we've been producing. We're a geopolitical intelligence service focused on the nexus of Latin and Anglo-America, aligning U.S. and Latin American interests and focusing on promoting the rule of law, free enterprise, economic development. Now, Steve has been busy as ever, and I'm so pleased to chat with him. His latest articles, we usually publish these first in English with BizPac Review, and then we publish simultaneously a Spanish version on our own site, and then we republish later the English version. So he's written a couple with BizPac Review this month, and the latest one, the headline is "Exposure is First Step to Bringing Feds into Line with the Constitution," and there's a heck of a lot going on here, a lot of action, and Steve has got the weight of the United States on his shoulders sometimes. So, Steve, let me bring you on. Steve, our editor-at-large, founder of the Impunity Observer. Why do you see exposure as this pivotal ingredient to trying to restore or promote constitutional government in the United States?
Because the public needs to understand the threat to its liberty. That the way that the current regime in the United States is actually a threat to liberty, and we don't have enough people who understand it. So when the Congress exposes its corruption, its violations of the Constitution, its politicization of justice, all of those things, people have to understand this is not normal politics. This is a concerted attack on the liberty of the United States, and the regime is trying to perpetuate itself in power. And it's up to the public to resist that, and the Congress is doing its job, more or less, of trying to expose it. But we need more of that so that the public understands.
My concern with this, Steve, and I've shared this with you before, is that I suspect public awareness is rising. And how are we going to translate that public awareness into concrete or structural changes?
Well, yes, it is rising, but it's not to the level that it needs to be. I mean, right. People understand how inflation affects them.
Yes.
There are all kinds of negative things going on in their life. But if you look at the elections last November, those things were there too. And yet the Democrats almost swept the table, except for 5 seats in the House of Representatives. Right? The Democrats would have continued complete control of the government, and none of what's being exposed now would be exposed because the Democrats are not interested in good government. They're interested in power, and they're willing to do anything to get it, and they have. So now the Republicans are in place, and that's not enough. That they say, oh, we're going to have this policy, that policy, we want to change this. No, it's not enough. People have to recognize that those policies that the regime, the Biden regime, has been implementing are a concerted effort to overthrow the democratic system and install a dictatorship. And until we realize that, we're not going to be able to put in perspective all that this administration is doing.
Yeah, many of us have a sense that constitutional government has been chipped away at for decades, and now the connection to constitutionality is tenuous. And okay, recently we had this Durham report come out. How closely have you followed that, and how relevant is that, or how important is that to changing public sentiment?
Well, I don't know, because the legacy media, regime media, I call it, does not report on it. That report is extremely important. It's devastating to the regime, but only if people know it and only if they understand what it actually means. That report, the key thing in that report is that Barack Obama and the major players in his regime were briefed that Hillary Clinton's campaign was behind the Steele dossier, meaning that the whole Russia-Trump narrative, the collusion narrative, was false. It was created by his political opponent, Hillary Clinton. And the Obama administration embraced it and used it and undermined American democracy. They interfered in the election. They didn't succeed. Trump won anyway, but they used everything that they did. They were so vulnerable to investigations and prosecutions for their violations of law. They had to undermine the Trump administration, and they did. So the federal bureaucracy worked to destroy, to undermine the Trump administration. And Trump, his entire 4 years, he had to fight that. And so the Durham report makes that clear. Now we know there's a complete investigation, total investigation. And now we know that the Democrat Party under Barack Obama attempted to essentially overthrow our constitutional order, because keeping yourself in power, I don't care what your reasons are, breaking the law to keep yourself in power, undermining the integrity of elections, is destroying democracy.
Yeah, the tragedy is that these people seem to just get away with it. So we've discussed this before, but Barack Obama obviously used the IRS to target Tea Party activist groups and withhold their nonprofit status purely as a ploy to protect his own re-election. And yet that seems to have just gone down the memory hole. Now, the Durham report has key insights, and there's an important theme which you touch upon a lot, Steve, in your articles with BizPac, that there's a confirmation bias problem, that people have been kind of, like you call it demonization. People have been led to believe that anyone who holds certain views or who challenges the regime must be evil in some way. And there are all sorts of lovely names that these dissidents get called. Do you want to refer to this barrier to the free flow of information or of a better informed citizenry?
Well, it's a combination. I mean, without the media spreading regime lies and suppressing truth about it, the regime couldn't possibly do what it's done. There's no way. Because if you had a knowledgeable population, if they understood, for instance, surveys showed 17% of the people who voted for Biden said if they knew that the Hunter Biden laptop was real, genuine, that they wouldn't have voted for Biden. Well, of course not. And now you can look and see the actions that Biden takes about China. They're so senseless. It defies all types of common sense. And you wonder, and a lot of people think it's incompetence or some kind of bias, but it leaves everything open to interpretation that Biden has been bought by China. Now, on that laptop, there's information that shows that the Bidens received money from China. Now we know from the House Oversight Committee investigation, James Comer, they have found millions of dollars that have gone to 9 Biden family members. So along comes the Biden regime media and says, yeah, but none of it is directly went to Joe Biden himself. Oh, so you got 9 family members. Why is China, through cutout companies, LLCs, why would they be sending money to Joe Biden's relatives? You got to at least ask the question. We're not talking about convicting them in a court of law, guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. We're talking about protecting the United States from a president who's been compromised by a foreign power who's our chief adversary. And the media keeps the public, or a good sector of the public, from knowing it. The other sector, who doesn't follow that legacy media, they understand it. And that's the issue. Who's going to win? That sector or the sector that blindly follows the regime because it's been fooled by the regime's media.
Yeah, we do appear to be in a situation where there is glaring and just catastrophic elite capture in the United States by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, I'm just going to quote briefly from your article. The Durham report demonstrates the tip of the iceberg of criminality within the Barack Obama-led cabal. And as you said, the Durham report, which has come out and it's gotten lots of coverage in alternative media, if you look at the Epoch Times, for example, they're all over it. That is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, in your article, you say that you do weave in the Guatemala angle, how Guatemala has basically been fighting the same, let's say, capture of institutions that is underway in the United States.
Yes, that's correct. That the State Department, well, it was under Joe Biden. He was Obama's point man. He was instrumental in pressuring Guatemala's former president Otto Perez into extending the criminal UN commission, supposed anti-impunity commission, CICIG. And then they promptly deposed Perez and put him in jail. Well, what the CICIG did was, of course, you have to understand, it was run by the U.S. Embassy, of course, the State Department. They completely took over Guatemala's justice system. They controlled criminal prosecution, and they controlled its court of last resort, the Constitutional Court. And that court issued numerous illegal rulings that did incalculable damage to Guatemala. So the United States was essentially taking over Guatemala's criminal prosecution. Now, Guatemala, after it's lucky, it has only a 5-year term in its court. When that 5-year term was up in 2021, the Guatemalans saw the disaster of it, and they resisted naming State Department favored judges. And they fired the key prosecutor, Juan Francisco Sandoval, that the State Department had been using, who took over for the CICIG when it left the country. So Guatemala was in the process of recovering. Now, the State Department had two vital interests there. One was to continue its conquest of Guatemala, its imposition of criminal socialists, and two, probably more important, to hide its own crimes and the crimes of its agents that it was outwardly supporting. I mean, President of Guatemala, Alejandro Giammattei, in an interview with Heritage Foundation authors, said that the State Department was trying to overthrow his government, and that the U.S. ambassador warned him not to reappoint Consuelo Porras. And he said, well, that's a question of sovereignty. And he reappointed Consuelo Porras. And the State Department left itself so vulnerable when it blatantly intervened during 2021 and then 2022 in the appointment of the prosecutor general process, that it committed so many crimes it drew congressional scrutiny. So the State Department is vulnerable, and the Congress, all it has to do is follow those threads, those questions, and it can expose all of that criminality that occurred in Guatemala. Now, that criminality is the exact same criminality that's happening in the United States. And what Guatemala shows the United States is how much worse it can actually become. If anybody in the United States is doubting how dangerous it is to have the Justice Department persecute is a better word, political enemies, and protect political allies like the Bidens, of course, then they should look at Guatemala, because it was much worse. I mean, people went to jail for years without trial and without any evidence, in gross violation of law. In other words, the people who did that are the same people that the Durham report identified as the violators of the rules in the United States. And so we have to wake up to that. We have to understand how much worse it can get, how threatening it is. We need to stop it right now. And the experience of Guatemala and what the Obama-Biden people did in Guatemala is very instructive for the United States if they pay attention to it.
Yeah, so let's move on to your second article, Steve. This one, the headline is How Biden Deflects Corruption and Keeps Supporters in Tow. And you refer to this, this othering of MAGA Republicans, Make America Great Again Republicans, and the way they've been characterized as extremists. The strange thing to me is that, of course, Make America Great Again really, it's a rather generic or broad term that just means you want to preserve the best of the United States. So how has this been flipped into some kind of pejorative?
Because people just look at the acronym. They don't look at what it really says. You're right. Make America Great Again. That's what MAGA stands for. But the people who the regime is targeting, they just hear MAGA. That's just a word. It's an identifier of insurrectionists, white supremacists, people who are dangerous, who are going to take away all of your rights and leave you destitute. And so it's a demonization. It goes back to Saul Alinsky. That it's very simple. Alinsky said every issue must be polarized. All good is on one side and all evil is on the other side. And that, of course, is never true. But manipulators, as he put it, organizers,
yes,
have to portray it that way. And that's the Biden regime strategy. I mean, there are a few people in the United States. I saw Byron York of the Washington Examiner. He said that the reason that the Democrats didn't get wiped out in the last election was exactly this. He didn't use the word demonization, but he said because the media makes people think that their enemies are evil, and so. What could be worse than letting the evil ones take power? So you turn your back and you give a pass to a regime that's breaking the laws, that's breaking the Constitution, that's destroying the principles that made the United States a great country and a world power, and you just let it go because you think that the opponents are so evil. I mean, this is a classic Marxist strategy to take down a society and install a dictatorship.
Not only does this vilification of people who identify as MAGA or who can be broadly identified as part of the Make America Great Again movement, so not only does it preserve those in power, protect the regime, it is what as I referred to as othering, which opens the door or sets people up to accept lawfare, to accept persecution of those without rule of law, let's say, checks on the imposition of the justice system. Do you want to comment on that, Steve, about the rise of lawfare kind of going hand in hand with demonization?
Well, of course, it's the demonization that leads to people accepting the lawfare. Anything you do to keep the evil ones from power is good, is acceptable. And of course, this coincides with a society that's lost its way, that doesn't have any principles. I mean, the principles upon which the United States is founded is God-granted, creator-granted rights,
yes,
that are inalienable. You can't deprive the public of them, the individuals of them, because they're granted by the Creator. Now, that is the basis of individualism. But this Biden regime is a collectivist regime. That's what identity politics is all about. That's what they push all over the globe. Some people call it indigenism, but it's where people are whatever group they belong to. They're not individuals. That's the way to control people, because the individual no longer has rights. The individual is there to serve the state. The state is mother, father, teacher, everything. Individual is nothing. And people don't seem to understand that, but it's a key component. And if you look at the identity politics that Obama followed, that the Democrat Party has followed since Obama, and has become extremely visible under Biden, people are not paying attention. It's like they're saying, we want what we want, and we think the government can give it to us. Well, guess what? You're wrong. The government, what it will give you is misery for everybody, including the people that support the regime.
Right. And this ties into this whole debt ceiling debacle where every, I don't know, year or 6 months, I lose track, it seems so frequent, the federal government gets into this tizzy about how to handle the debt ceiling when we all know they're just going to raise it and make a drama. What is happening right now? Have you looked at the proposal on the table for the debt ceiling to be lifted? And why is this, let's say, meaningful in terms of framing perceptions of the regime?
The agreement that Biden and Speaker McCarthy have reached is now being debated. It's controversial. Republicans, a lot of conservative Republicans are upset because it doesn't get what they want. That's nuts. Because what are you going to do with an anti-American regime? You look at what that regime has done. It's criminalized parents who don't want their children to be propagandized by absurd things, teaching children they can change gender whenever they want and without their parents' consent or even knowledge, and etc. There are so many crazy things. The Afghan withdrawal, giving $80 billion of weaponry to the Taliban, obviously an enemy, bowing over to China. I mean, if you look at all of the domestic and foreign policies, the United States loses. So think about this. In the debt ceiling, it could lead to a default. If the United States defaults, not on its debt to employees, no, its debt to creditors. If the United States were to default on its debt to creditors, that would make it a third world country. Hardly any country's ever done that. Argentina, I think, is one of the few. Cuba, of course. They can't borrow money. If you can't borrow money, you can't do anything. So if we destroy the good credit of the United States, we've really done a bad thing to the country. Now, the Biden regime, I am convinced, doesn't care anything about it. If they thought, and I wrote this, if they thought that they could destroy United States credit in the marketplace and blame it on Republicans, they would do that. So Republicans today should consider themselves lucky that the Biden regime has apparently, we don't know because they haven't signed yet, but it looks like they want to, that the Biden regime is accepting the deal that McCarthy has reached with them. Because what they have to do is avoid a default. There's nothing more damaging to the United States and its people than defaulting on its credit obligations. The United States cannot default on its debt to creditors, cannot. And if it does, it's finished. Now, I believe that the Biden administration, Biden regime, would be capable of doing that. And so why debate? Oh, let's get this and let's get that. We need they only took $2 billion off the $80 billion for the IRS agents. So what? I mean, the whole thing is bad. If you want to fix, if Republicans want to fix all of that, what their job is to expose all of this corruption, all of this anti-democratic behavior of the Biden regime. Make sure that the public is well aware of all of that and the threat to their liberty, the threat to their prosperity and future survival, so that they vote these people out of office. Our last chance to vote these people out of office is coming in November of 2024. And we should be focusing on that, on exposing the criminality of this regime, its anti-democratic, totalitarian nature. And so take the deal, avoid the default. That's the best you can get. So McCarthy got what he could. It's not good, but he's up against a regime that has done so much damage to the country that it's a plus that he's managing to avoid a default. So let's avoid that default and let's educate the public and let's concentrate on getting rid of these totalitarians from power in the election next year, and then doing what we have to do to change the country and return it to its constitutional, timeless, universal principles.
Yeah, this whole debt ceiling is really a joke because everyone knows no one is actually going to abide by it and stop increasing the debt. It's embarrassing. It's a sideshow. As you say, the problem, though, is that it's becoming a hot potato in terms of people. Everyone's pointing at everyone else and blaming everyone else for the situation. And some people seem to get more, I don't know, dirt on their shirts or more blame than others. And so, as you were saying, it's a pity that those who are less favored by the media will come out, let's say, culpable in perceptions. Now, but the other point you made about the default is serious. If the US were to actually default on its bonds, that would be historic and a real turning point for the worse for the United States. Now, I want to bring in Moto Echeverria for the last few minutes of our show. So, Steve, I mean, I'm going to have to let you go, but maybe a quick final remark if I've missed anything.
No, Fergus, I don't think you've missed anything. And I think it's very good that we're going to have you and Mauro discussing, I think it is Paraguay you're going to discuss.
Exactly, yes. So thanks so much, Steve. Steve is our editor-at-large. Follow him on Twitter. Go to impunityobserver.com. Follow all our updates. Steve is incredibly active, and we're fortunate to have him working with us. So, Moto, come on in, mate.
Fergus, I just wanted to comment that I think it's good that you're going to do this with Mauro. He's been doing a great job for us, and I'm sure he has great insights, and I look forward to him sharing it with our audience.
Thank you, Steve. I agree. Moto has been doing honorable work. I'm really pleased to have him as part of our team. So, Moto, can we see you here? Let me there you go. Okay, Moto Echeverria, our deputy editor in Quito, Ecuador. He has written a profile, actually, of the new Paraguayan president, Santiago Peña. Now, Moto, Paraguay is one of these countries, I hate to say it, a little bit of a backwater that you don't often hear about, but why is Paraguay so important or meaningful to broader geopolitical discussions?
Yeah, so Paraguay is crucial in terms of geopolitical things. For example, Paraguay is the only country in South America that supports Taiwan. The rest of South America supports and has relations with China. So when the general elections were held and Paraguayans elected new president Santiago Peña, who also belongs to the Colorado Party that has been in power for over 35 years.
30 odd years, yeah, exactly. Long time.
Yeah. So he promised that he will keep relations with Taiwan, while the second most voted candidate was saying that he would renew relations with China. That means cutting all ties with Taiwan. It is also Paraguay, and we often forget that Paraguay is really important in terms of transnational security. There are, for example, Ciudad del Este is home for Hezbollah, which is a Lebanese terrorist group in Latin America.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is really important in terms of transnational security and cooperation with the United States.
Yeah, it is a bit of a no man's land in that a lot can go on there without a great deal of scrutiny. And you refer to the Colorado Party or Partido Colorado. They have been in power since the ending of the dictatorship, the Stroessner dictatorship, except for I think it was 4 years under a not so pleasant president who was a former priest, or I think he still claims to be a priest. So we've got a profile of this new gentleman, Santiago Peña, and the subtitle we gave is that voters elected for continuity. Now, he made lots of grandiose populist promises, but in general, he is a deep insider or tight with this party, which I guess is good if you want continuity, but bad if you want to find transparency and an end of graft.
Yeah, that's really important too, because Paraguayans elected um, 45 senators, 80 House representatives, and 17 governors. And the Colorado Party obtained a majority in all of these positions, apart from the presidency and vice presidency of Paraguay. They obtained, for example, 23 Senate seats, 47 House seats, and 15 governors out of 17, which is crazy. They hold a lot of power. And when you want to counter balance or have counter checks to power,
Yes.
it's really difficult when you have all this dominance by the same party for a long time.
Yeah, in some ways, it's a little bit like a California situation where the Democratic Party just owns that state and doesn't face accountability. So yeah, check out the profile. Who is the new Paraguayan president at impunityobserver.com. Follow Moro on Twitter. He's also active. He's done incredible work. He's working on an investigation right now about child soldiers in Colombia, which we're going to be editing today, to be frank. So he's doing tremendous work. Otherwise, it was great to chat with Steve, to catch up. It's an honor to do these shows. Thank you all for your support, people. Come back next month and we'll be observing impunity again. Cheers.